able to care for our patients when safe, and ensuring that we're able to do testing for COVID-19, as well as really making an effort to help our patients who need regular care, who are ill and need to come in. The hustle and bustle is now replaced by telehealth visits with only 2 or 3 people in our waiting rooms at a time. We've also increased our outreach to our homeless clients, adding shelter sites where our street medicine team visits, going to Project Room Key sites, and increasing all of our outreach in Venice, Santa Monica, and the West Side. Due to the Safer at Home order and the changes I've described, we have experienced a $2 million loss in revenue in March and April. And for this reason, your support of our fundraising efforts and of the Venice Art Walk are crucial to our ability to serve our patients. I encourage you to find an artwork that you love and bid generously. You'll have a direct impact on our response to COVID-19 and an ability to continue to provide healthcare to our community. With that, let me turn this over to Michael and David, and you'll learn a lot about collecting fine art photography. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. I appreciate that intro, and we're excited to be here with you today. My name is Michael Hewlett, and I'm the gallery director at Peter Fetterman Gallery. I've been with him for close to 8 years now, and I've been in the photographic field for 2 decades. So David and I are proud to be representing Peter Fetterman Gallery today, and by proxy, Peter Fetterman, who is a member of the Venice Art Walk Curatorial Committee. The Curatorial Committee is responsible for recommending artworks for the Venice Family Art Walk and auction to support the clinic. So before we launch into our chat, a quick comment about the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen right now. You can feel free to send in questions anytime during this talk. Some will be answered immediately via text for the clinic's Venice Art Walk team, and then others will be saved for the Q&A that is at the close of this talk. So now we're going to get back to our program. We're excited to join you for a number of reasons. For one, the clinic is commemorating 50 years of providing healthcare to those in need in Los Angeles. And this is the 41st anniversary of the Venice Art Walk, which is a major, major fundraiser for the clinic's vital services. And this is the 8th year that our gallery has been consigning and curating works for the auction. So it's a match made in heaven that we're all here together. Over to you, David.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Jones. I am the Associate Director here for the gallery. I have been writing, thinking critically about photography and dealing with the materiality of the medium now for around 8 years, and have been very lucky with the gallery now for the past few years to continue doing that in our domestic endeavors and our international ones as well. A little bit about the gallery itself. The gallery was founded in 1988. We were one of the pioneer tenants here at Bergamot Station, where I am currently streaming from. And during the gallery's formative years, as Peter Fetterman would so wisely say, before there was even actually a physical space, instead of replacing his car brakes or his tires as one should, he was actually buying photographs by photographers at that point that he adored and the work that he believed in. And so during this, again, formative period, the gallery's collection is really centered around humanist photography, which is very much still so the case today. It's definitely the base of the gallery's collection. And over the years, as we've grown and as we've expanded, the collection has grown across every genre you can really imagine in photography, and really centered around celebrating some of the most talented human beings to have ever picked up a camera. And so that's a little bit about the gallery here, and I'll pass it back to Mike to talk about what to look for in collecting.
All right, thank you, David. So what to look for in collecting art? That's a big, big, broad spectrum to talk about. But before I get into specifics, when looking at starting or adding to an existing collection, like why we're all here, why the Venice Art Walk and auction is happening, I want to say that there's one rule above all else: buy what you love. Simple as that. The hope is that with the guidance of a gallery or a dealer, your collection is going to increase in value over time. But buying art just for the sake of an investment takes all the joy out of the experience. The second rule that I want to harp on is don't sleep on a piece if it's calling out to you. If it's within your means and you love it, then get it. Simple as that. A major collector actually once told me that the only regrets he had in his life are the works that he didn't buy, and they still haunt him to this day. So carpe diem, seize the day, buy what you love. Collecting in and of itself is a uniquely autobiographical experience, and it's going to be different for everyone. So if you're looking to buy outside of the Venice Art Walk and auction that is happening right now, the best place to start is by looking online and going to local galleries or museums and seeing what speaks to you, what calls out to you. Once you found what you like, the next step is going to be to find a trustworthy dealer that to help you work to build your collection. And the easiest way I'd say to know if a dealer is quote unquote legit or trustworthy is to ask if they'll buy the artwork back from you for what you paid for it. And if the answer is no, then there's your red flag right there. Too many dealers sell what they know people will buy, and they don't stand behind what they sell. They don't actually love it. They don't believe in it. So find someone you enjoy talking to, like me or like David, or like the great team over at the Venice Family Clinic that's running this art walk and auction, and grow a relationship with them. I have a client that came to the gallery for years and years without ever buying anything, asked me a million questions, and we just talk about art. And now he actually has a collection that would rival some small museums. So remember, there's no dumb questions. Most gallerists have a wealth of knowledge and they're happy to share it. I'm on to my next point. I want to talk about analog versus digital, which is by practice in our gallery. We love analog and we try to stay away from digital as much as possible. And that's not saying that there's anything wrong with digital by any means. We just prefer the idea of a film negative being turned into a handcrafted darkroom print, which both processes that I just described takes years and years of practice to master, versus setting a camera to auto and hitting enter on a keyboard and having a digital print in your hands. This is an extreme generalization, I understand, but I've come across some beautiful digital prints. But for the most part, this is what attracts us to classic analog photography, which we're going to talk about some of that later. And this is why when looking for contemporary artists to add to the gallery's roster, we seek out the very few highly talented artists that are still working in analog processes. The last thing I want to talk about with you guys is the question I get asked the most, is what I think about editioning versus what's called non-editioning or an open edition artworks, which means there's no number to it, no limit. And what I have to say about that is photography versus, say, painting is different in the sense that a painting is the original piece of art. And in photography, the film negative is the original. And so any photographic print you've ever seen in any museum or gallery is technically a copy from the original. But that's the inherent beauty in photography. It's democratic in nature and widely accessible. While you may not be able to go out and buy a Modigliani tomorrow, you can go out and perhaps buy the same photograph that is in the permanent collection of the Getty or of, MoMA, New York, or the Met. So there's no other art medium where that in these days and times is a possibility. So for anyone that I would say is worrying about buying a 20th century photograph that doesn't have an edition number on it, don't worry about it. Because a beautiful image, at the end of the day, a beautiful image is a beautiful image and will always be that. So if it evokes an emotion in you, I say then that's all that matters. Go for it. All right, David, over to you.
All right, thank you, Mike. So now we'll discuss framing, matting, transportation, conservation, and condition. To start, framing and matting are highly subjective, and so that's something, of course, you can work out the details rather with your framer, but there are some basic guidelines that are important. The first of which, for photography and really for a majority of works on paper, should be housed behind Optium plexiglass. There are very few exceptions to this rule, and if you have any doubts, then you've already answered your question. We use Optium plexiglass here in the gallery for 3 reasons in particular. The first of which, being in California, we are earthquake prone, and plexiglass, unlike glass, is less likely to shatter upon impact. So again, it adds a layer of protection for the photograph. And with Optium enhances the viewing experience. So it mitigates, it reduces glare when you're viewing the image so that you're actually appreciating the work itself, not so much your reflection. And the second reason behind the Optium is that it potentially, depending on how much sun exposure is in the room where the photograph is hanging, the Optium will protect the print from potentially harmful UV rays. So those are I think the basic principles really with framing that are important to take into consideration. With matting, I would just ensure that your framer is using acid-free archival materials. That way, again, you are preserving the photograph, preserving the work to enjoy. And moving on here to transportation, really to sum it up here, if at any point you have any doubt, then again, it's better to stop and to be safe and bring in a licensed third-party art handling company that could take care of that for you. And the reason for that being is if there is an accident in transit, again, with them being licensed and having insurance, that also comes into play. So it's just a rule of thumb. If you ever have any doubts, it's always best to pause, to take a break, and bring someone into the fold who can take care of that. And now on to conservation, or excuse me, not on to condition. Condition in its own right could be its own talk. So I really want to sum up here condition that if you are acquiring work from an auction house, it's a part of their protocol to provide you with a condition report. And so with that being said, feel free to always ask questions. There's no such thing as a silly question. If you're buying work from a dealer, ask them about the condition. And if either source gives you an answer that you're not happy with, it's more than fine to bring in a third party to consult with. And again, I really want to just reiterate here the importance of just asking questions, and that way just not assuming that everything's in perfect condition. And I'll end here with conservation. There are plenty of talented conservators, really domestically and internationally. And all of that to say, if you notice there is something, a condition issue or a flaw with the image, please contact a conservator to work on this. Do not try to treat images yourself. You could cause irreversible damage and therefore not have the image or enjoy it to that extent anymore. And that sums that up there. And I'll pass it back to Mike to talk about some of the works we'll be discussing.
All right, so now we're going to take some time and look at some of the works included in this year's auction. I want you guys to know that there are over 150 pieces in the auction, which you can bid on right now in various mediums. So we hope that this piques your interest to tour the whole collection, see what jumps out at you, and you can go see all those pieces over at artsy.net/Venice Art Walk. And I think now we're going to bring up some pieces that David and I are going to chat about. All right, so this first one that you guys are viewing by the great late Sid Avery. We actually, the first time I saw this piece was during an exhibition that we put on at the gallery for Frank Sinatra's 100th birthday. And this was the main image that we used for it, because after Peter and I viewed it, it stopped us in our tracks. We felt that it was him in and of itself. It just screams cool, you know, ultimate cool. And it's funny, the day that we had our opening, the Frank Sinatra Jr. and Nancy Sinatra Sr. and Jr. were all of them present. And they told us that this was their favorite image of Frank, that it embodied him. And so, David, what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's fantastic. I mean, really, from the tone of the colors that come through in the photograph, the composition, how he's looking off to the left there, and the music that he's holding on to, it just alludes to a different time in music. You also see the band behind him, so you know that he didn't quite do this thing alone. I love all of those various aspects when we get to appreciate this photograph. But again, it's one of Avery's seminal images, without a doubt.
All right, what do we have up next?
Okay, so this is a image by Thurston Hopkins titled La Dolce Vita. And it is by, again, Thurston Hopkins, a legendary British photographer. You can't have a conversation about legendary British photography or legendary British photojournalism and leave Thurston out of that conversation. he had an illustrious career and paved the way for many photographers after him. And this is, without a doubt, one of the all-time great feel-good images. We don't quite know the details. We don't know why, what they're looking at, how he arrived at the scene. But I think that's what's charming about the image. That's what's to admire. And I think another thing that really I marvel at when I look at this image is this is one of Thurston's seminal images. And when you think about how many photographs there are in existence, how many photographs we'll see in our lifetime, it's amazing still that there are a collective of photographs that are highly celebrated. This one being a part of that conversation, absolutely. So loss of words, but really, I think it's a great, fantastic image. Mike, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, you said it yourself. It's one of the great feel-good images. And it's funny, the years ago, whenever I started working at the gallery, I saw this image for the first time and just immediately fell in love. As a poodle owner, I was drawn to it naturally. And I showed it to my wife and she fell in love with it as well. And so years later, I ended up buying her a print of it as a Valentine's Day gift. And we have it now hanging in our hallway at home. And every time we walk by it, it puts a smile on both our faces. It's just one of those images that it's the je ne sais quoi. It's the look on the driver's face.
Yeah.
And it's timeless. It's happy. Yeah, I dare anybody to look at this image and not be grinning after 10 seconds.
Right. All right.
Next slide. Okay, Don Hunstein's beautiful Billie Holiday. Now, this image speaks to me on multiple levels. I've seen tons of pictures of Billie Holiday, and a lot of them, of course, are with her singing like this, but none quite have this candid moment in time where she's pulled away from the microphone, she's mid-thought or mid-word, and she's having this reflective moment, this introspective moment. And that, to me, it's what makes this photograph. The photograph itself, like a lot of these great 20th century photographs are, the composition is beautiful, but it's this quiet, introspective moment that was captured that we're transported to, that we get to share with her, even though none of us were there. Some of us, David and myself included, probably weren't alive whenever this was taken. I threw myself in there to age me down a little bit. We weren't alive when this was taken. So we get to experience this because of the photograph that Don took. David, what are your thoughts on it?
I agree with you absolutely, and being able to witness this very quiet moment. And I think it is, a part of this is acknowledging the technical aspect and how amazing it was in the period that this was taken, that in that fraction of a second, Don is able to ensure that the composition is correct, the exposure is correct, that the negative was processed correctly. Because if any one of those things was messed up at any point, you and I wouldn't be sitting here talking about this image. And to do that with one of the most iconic singers, with Lady Day herself, at this, again, quiet moment as she's, in between notes or in between thoughts, it's a beautiful moment and absolutely one of my favorite Billie Holiday images.
All right, I think we're ready for the next slide.
Okay, Joseph Karsh. Mr. Karsh, without a doubt, I will just hands down say is a lighting genius. The best way I think of it really is, the equivalent of watching a movie. If you watch a movie with bad lighting, you're immediately pulled out of the experience. You recognize that the lighting is off, and you're looking for everything that you can sort of pick apart in that scene. But when you watch a movie with great lighting, you feel immersed in the scene. You could even be in your living room, you could be in the movie theater, but with fantastic lighting, you feel like you're a part of what's happening. And when I look at a Karsh image, that's exactly how I feel. I feel like I'm standing across from some of the most significant figures of the 20th century. And again, Karsh was able to do this at a time where you couldn't check your camera to make sure that your exposure was correct. You had no sort of instant gratification that you were on the right path. All the while he was doing this, again, with very, very larger than life figures. So, in a given scene, you have anywhere between 10 to 15 lights set off at different distances and heights and exposures. I mean, when I look at this image in particular, I mean, look at the detail on the lighting detail on Robert Frost's hand, the chair just behind, how it almost has this ribbon-like texture, or the dog just there in the corner with its own sort of texture. Everything, again, is meticulously thought through to bring you to feel that, again, you're standing across from Robert Frost himself, and also to bring you into the perspective of the subjects that Karsh was photographing. I think it's outstanding and hard to find nowadays in portrait photography. Mike, what do you think?
Couldn't agree with you more. I would say that I've spoken about Yusuf Karsh's work 1,000 times because he was maybe the most prominent portrait photographer of the 20th century. And a great example is the portrait that he took of Winston Churchill,
Right.
is actually the image that is used on the British £5 note to this day. So it's like taking the image of Lincoln that's on the penny. So with that said, every image of Yusuf said, I see the phrase that comes to mind. The way I think of him is I think of him as a painter with light. The way he's using his different light setups to bring your eye to different points of view, different perspectives in the image. And then overall, to have the ability to compose an image in his mind beforehand, set it all up, and then sit down with these, like you said, larger than life figures, these people that, you know, would make so many photographers shake in their bobby socks to sit down with them
Yeah.
and capture what appears to be the very essence of their soul in the portrait. It's beyond amazing. It's masterful. And I could look at this all day long. I feel like I could sit here and have a glass of whiskey with him and chat about the book I last read. Those are my thoughts. All right, I think we are going to move on over now to the question and answer Q&A section. Let's see what we have. Let's dive into that. All right, David. Let's see, our first question is, how do you know when a piece speaks to you? I would say that the easiest way to know if a piece speaks to you, well, first of all, if it catches your eye. If you're walking by, say, a beautiful house or a beautiful car or a beautiful piece of clothing, and it stops you as you're walking by and you go back to have a closer look, that's what I'm talking about when I say it speaks to you. When something stops you in your tracks and like an arrow through the heart, it grabs you. And then I would say if it's speaking to you and it's something that maybe you should look at adding to a collection, is when you revisit it, when you can't stop thinking about it, when it haunts you.
Right.
There's plenty of images that I've seen, I've loved, and maybe in a week later, I wasn't as in love with it. And then there's some that I've seen, I've loved, and could not stop thinking about them until I eventually added them to my collection. And that's just the way it goes. It's all subjective. I can't tell any particular person what to look for, what they're going to be interested in. David, what do you think about that? How would you answer that question?
I agree. I think it's, it's very subjective. I prefer the slow and steady method and trying to spend time with it. If it's, if I'm still thinking about it the next morning, if I'm still thinking about it as I'm eating, that's definitely a good sign. But sometimes also I acknowledge that you don't have that time. Sometimes you're not afforded that amount of time to really ponder and think about it to that degree. So there is some, I think, some wiggle room there. But I do fall under that category of trying to spend more time thinking about it and seeing if it's really impactful. One thing I did over the course of being here at the gallery, I did encounter was a client. They were a couple, rather, and they had this really interesting method I'd like to share with you all, in which they actually took the time to go through the gallery, go through the show, and both of them had their own separate pen pads. And so they, went through the show, picked the works that they thought were impactful to them. They had their own separate lists. But I thought was fascinating is how they then refined that selection. And so what they did with these two separate lists without consulting with one another was then match the two lists and see what were the commonalities there. So I think for couples that are looking to acquire works, I thought that was such a brilliant method to use. And, I thought that was one, again, brilliant way to kind of look at what catches your eye and how to then refine that.
All right, so we have another question here. Who is an emerging photographer you really like? That
Hmm.
is a fantastic question. I, my answer is going to be subjective because I don't know if you could call him an emerging artist. His name is Pentti Samalati, and he's a Finnish photographer that is in his late 60s, almost 70 years old. And why I put him under the ranking of emerging is because he feels that everyone should have access to the works that he makes, the photos and the prints that he makes himself. He does all analog printing in a small little dark room that's built next to his house outside of Helsinki in the middle of the countryside in Finland. And he keeps his prices at an emerging artist price point, and he won't raise them for anything. He feels that everybody should have access, everybody should be able to enjoy the art. And in terms of a photographer, level of artistry in composition, in subject matter, in feel, and also artistry in being able to make a masterful silver gelatin print, which is hard to do. He is maybe the best buy in the entire photographic world. That's my person. David, do you have an emerging photographer that you would throw in the mix?
I do. And there's a bit of a story there. My pick would be Noelle Oswald, without a doubt. And for our listeners here who've never heard of Noelle Oswald, she actually was introduced to us through a friend of the gallery, to Mike. And all of this dialogue, which is really fascinating, it's never happened for us here at the gallery. All of this happened through Instagram. It was the first time that this has happened. We see a lot of work on Instagram, but it's one thing to see an image on your phone than versus actually seeing the print process, understanding what the artist is thinking and how to bring this print to life. And I thought with Noelle being so young, also her work revolving around revolving around identity and revolving around images of the self, all these really fascinating topics. I thought it was astounding. And she has such a classical visual vocabulary, again, which is rare for a young photographer to have a refined vision for how they see themselves and how they experience the world. So Noelle would be my pick. And I think, we were lucky to have her on board thanks to what you're doing, Mike.
Oh, well, yes, we're happy to have her.
Yeah.
All right, David, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah. Let's see here. Can you talk more about silver gelatin prints and how they are made? That is an excellent question. For the most part, silver gelatin prints themselves, well, really across the board, silver gelatin prints are done in a dark room. And so in some dark rooms, you'll find that they have what they call a safe red light, which is a very dim light that will basically not expose the paper or ruin the paper while you're trying to print the image. And so the silver gelatin paper alludes to gelatin, which is on the photo paper itself, and the silver solution, rather, the light sensitive solution that is embedded in the gelatin. And so when you hear the word silver gelatin, you immediately can think again of someone working in a dark room, printing the image by hand, hands are in chemicals. And, it's something that is a trial process. You won't get it right the first time. I think a rule of thumb I heard was for an amateur photographer, you could spend somewhere around 2.5 hours in a dark room to just produce one print. Let alone if you're trying to do more than one, it really can take all day. And so I say that to say how labor intensive it is. And Mike, do you have anything to add about silver gelatin prints here?
I think you covered it, David.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have one more here. I'm just going to jump on really quick. Can you please repeat the name David spoke about? The artist on Instagram, her name is Noelle, Noell Oswald, and that's OSZ as in Zeta, VAL, Oswald. All right, so I'm gonna jump on to one more question. What's the best investment out of this year's selection? So I am going to answer that question by not answering it. And by that, I mean the best investment out of the 150 plus works that are in the art walk auction is the one that pleases you. And I can't tell you which one that is. I can't tell you which ones are, you know, the next person that's going to be a cassette or the one that's going to go up 10 times in value. What I can tell you is follow your heart and you're not going to go wrong. David?
I agree. If you follow your heart and you firstly you acquire things based on the intrinsic value, then there's not much to lose there. But I think if you're looking at them as commodities or investments, you know, I think that money can be better spent put in a portfolio if you're looking to, you know, actually to invest that in that regard. But I think buying what you love, you know, again, you never lose in that matter. And I know that personally from my own collection. I know Mike, and looking at your expansive collection, the same thing falls true. You know, buying what you love.
Expansive.
The
That's
Hewlett
cute,
collection.
David.
No. But seriously, buying what you love will go a long way. It will save you the headache of, you know, looking and seeing if something has increased in value over time, which happens without a doubt. But you're not absorbing all of the intrinsic qualities in the image. That makes sense.
All right. Well, I think that is all of our time for today. I want to thank you, David, for joining me. Thank you, Liz. I want to thank all of you watching for joining us today. And hopefully you learned some tips for navigating the ever-changing landscape that is fine art collecting. So don't forget to bid on your favorite works over at artsy.net/Venice Art Walk. And bidding actually closes on May 19th, which is coming up soon at noon Pacific Standard Time. So get on over there, support Venice Family Clinic, support the arts, and thanks to everybody. Hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.